If there were chariots found in the Red Sea, it would probably have something to do with the crossing of the sea.
We know that this incident occurred in the Red Sea. We can be confident that there is probably some evidence left behind there.
In late 2024, a secret expedition descended into the Red Sea and found something that should have stopped the world, and it eroded an entire Egyptian army lying on the seafloor, frozen in time. Human bones were tangled in the wreckage, and deep beneath the coral, the unmistakable glint of gold. But when the findings reached the world's top Egyptologists, they went completely silent. Then the team checked their sonar maps against documentation from 40 years ago, and large sections of the debris field were just gone. Not eroded, gone. With drag marks on the seafloor where something heavy had been pulled away. The evidence is vanishing, and someone doesn't want you to know what's down there. The 10 million secret. $10 million. No university logo, no press release, no academic oversight. The mission was built in silence for a reason. According to reports from people close to the project, the funding came from private backers who insisted their names never appear anywhere near it. The subject alone was enough to trigger resistance. Those behind the operation believed that if it passed through normal academic channels, it would be delayed, restricted, or shut down before the first scan ever began. They did not want debate. They wanted answers, so they built the expedition outside the system. It was structured as a private marine survey with one objective: verify whether something extraordinary was sitting on the floor of the Red Sea. If nothing was there, the story would die quietly. If something was there, it would speak for itself. The team was assembled with that seriousness in mind. These were not casual divers looking for relics. Many were former military deep-sea specialists and underwater recovery operators. They had worked in high-pressure zones where mistakes cost lives. They were trained to search methodically, document precisely, and disturb as little as possible. They approached the Gulf the same way they would approach a classified recovery mission. Calm, controlled, focused. The technology reflected that mindset. They deployed advanced side-scan sonar capable of mapping the seabed in tight, overlapping grid patterns. This was not a wide sweep hoping to stumble onto something. Every section of seafloor was scanned deliberately. Each pass produced detailed imaging of shapes, elevation shifts, and irregularities. The data built layer by layer into a digital map. Remotely operated vehicles were prepared for visual confirmation. These machines carried high-definition cameras built to function at serious depths where human divers could not remain long. The video feed would transmit directly to the surface. If something unusual appeared, it would be seen clearly. Magnetometers were also used to detect metal buried beneath coral and sediment. If ancient bronze or structural components were trapped below the surface, the instruments would register subtle magnetic disturbances. The team was not guessing. They were searching for specific signatures. The focus of the search was the Gulf of Aqaba, the narrow extension of the Red Sea between the Sinai Peninsula and Saudi Arabia. They locked on to defined coordinates that had been argued over for decades. For days, the sonar showed nothing remarkable. Sand ridges, rock formations, natural variations. Then one sweep returned something different. Circular shapes, not one, not two, multiple, similar diameter, similar spacing, aligned along a path. At first, operators questioned the reading. They recalibrated. They ran the grid again. The shapes remained. As more passes overlapped, the pattern sharpened. These were not scattered formations. They were arranged in a line that stretched across the seafloor. The control room grew quiet. Nobody spoke. Natural geology does not produce repeated circular structures in organized distribution. Not like this, not spaced like this. Something was down there. A battlefield, preserved in coral. The remotely operated vehicle descended in controlled stages. On the monitor, the screen was almost completely black except for the narrow beams of artificial light. Fine sediment drifted in slow motion through the water, untouched for what many believe could be centuries. The depth created pressure not only on the equipment, but on the team watching above. There would be no quick retrieval if something failed. Every movement had to be deliberate. As the vehicle neared the seabed, the camera tilted forward. The lights exposed rough terrain covered in coral growth and mineral deposits. At first glance, it looked like a typical reef floor. Then a circular outline came into view. It was too symmetrical to ignore. The structure was partially buried but clearly defined. Even under coral buildup, evenly spaced cavities radiated outward from a central point. The control team froze. The operator moved closer, reducing speed to avoid disturbing sediment. The circular object sharpened on screen. The cavities were evenly cut and consistent in size. They were not the result of erosion. They followed the pattern of spokes. According to internal reports from the mission, that was the moment they realized they were not looking at random debris. They were looking at a wheel, an ancient chariot wheel, preserved under layers of coral for thousands of years. The vehicle continued forward along the same directional line. Within a short distance, another wheel appeared, then another. Each one lay on a similar axis. They were not scattered in different directions as wreckage from a storm would be. They followed a path. As the survey expanded, the scale became clearer. The debris field stretched in a defined corridor across the seabed. Later analysis estimated the spread at roughly 1.5 miles. 1.5 miles of wreckage. The alignment suggested forward movement before whatever event stopped it. Stopped everything. The closer the camera examined the wheels, the more details emerged. Some displayed 4 spoke cavities. Others showed 6. A smaller number revealed 8. Historians have long documented that New Kingdom Egyptian chariots varied in spoke design depending on period and purpose. 4 spokes were older models. 6 and 8 spokes belonged to elite warriors and royalty. Seeing every configuration together in one place was not evidence of a random accident. It was evidence of an entire chariot corps destroyed in a single moment. Fragments believed to be axle remains and portions of chariot cab frames were fused into reef formations nearby, locked into coral as if time itself had sealed them in place and refused to let go. Then the camera revealed something far more disturbing. Horse skeletal remains lay among the wheels. In several areas, the bones formed a pattern that appeared structured rather than random. According to those present, some skeletons were positioned parallel to the wheel line, as if the animals had been harnessed and moving in formation when it happened. In at least 2 instances, long bones appeared lodged within wheel cavities, as though the collapse was so sudden there was no time to separate animal from vehicle. No time to react, no time at all. The atmosphere in the control room shifted. What had started as curiosity was becoming something else entirely. Human skeletal fragments were also visible. Portions of ribs, vertebrae, and skull fragments were interwoven with the debris. The distribution did not suggest gradual accumulation. The remains were concentrated within the same corridor as the wheels and horses. All of it pointing toward one thing, one single catastrophic moment. One detail drew particular attention. A focused inspection light was directed onto a coral-covered wheel. Beneath the hardened mineral surface, a faint metallic reflection flickered. Subtle, but unmistakable. Some believe it could indicate traces of gold plating beneath the accretion, the kind reserved for high-ranking officers or royalty, though confirmation would require physical sampling. By the end of the visual sweep, the impression was clear. This did not resemble a shipwreck scattered by waves. It resembled a column halted mid-advance, wheels aligned, horses positioned, human remains caught where they fell, an army frozen in the last moment of its existence. The scale of destruction was undeniable, yet the objects alone were not the most unsettling part. The location itself was the only passage through an impossible gulf. The Gulf of Aqaba is not simply deep. In most sections, it plunges beyond 5,000 feet, forming nearly vertical underwater walls on either side. For anyone attempting to cross it at that depth, there would be no gradual slope, no gentle access. The water drops off sharply into trenches so deep that sunlight never reaches the bottom. According to reports from the team, the sheer scale of the Gulf made it nearly unimaginable that anything heavy could remain intact on the seabed. Strong currents and centuries of natural erosion should have scattered anything left behind, yet the data suggested otherwise. The breakthrough came when the sonar began scanning a narrow section closer to the Egyptian coastline. At that point, the instruments revealed a feature that shocked the operators. Rising from the surrounding abyss was an elevated underwater plateau stretching nearly 10 miles from west to east. It was a ridge broad enough to support movement, unlike the sheer trenches surrounding it. According to preliminary measurements, the plateau remained only around 900 feet below the surface at its shallowest point. That was dramatically higher than the surrounding deep channels. For objects heavy enough to sink and remain intact, this presented a rare natural shelter. The plateau begins at the beach of Nuweiba, a location that is geographically enclosed by steep mountains. The terrain there forms a natural barrier along the shoreline. Anyone approaching from the sides would be blocked by vertical rock formations, leaving only a narrow westward entrance. Mountains on every side, open water ahead, no way out except forward. The combination of underwater elevation and mountain walls above the surface created what some describe as a natural funnel. According to the team's assessments, lateral escape from this corridor would have been impossible without leaving tracks or disturbing sediments, making the pathway uniquely defined. Sonar images later confirmed that the debris trail aligned perfectly along this plateau. Not close to it, not near it, along it precisely. None of the wheels, skeletal remains, or chariot fragments appeared outside the ridge's perimeter. Instead of being scattered randomly by natural forces, they followed the linear shape of the underwater land bridge. Some team members expressed disbelief at how precise the alignment was. It suggested that whatever force brought the debris to the seabed operated along a pre-existing route rather than being subject to chance. Here is what makes that significant. This plateau cannot be seen from the surface. No ancient navigator could have known it existed. No army commander standing on the shore of Nuweiba could have looked out at the water and known there was a raised pathway beneath it. The only way to find it is with sonar technology that did not exist until the modern era. Yet the debris field sits on top of it with a precision that staggers the mind. Sediment analysis provided additional insight. The currents in the surrounding deep channels carry silt onto the plateau, gradually burying heavy objects over time. Reports indicated that this process sealed the wheels, axles, and skeletal remains beneath protective layers long before coral could grow extensively. Coral then encased the remains, preserving their shapes even as organic material decomposed. That combination of geology and biology created a time capsule, shielding artifacts from storms, anchors, and centuries of turbulence. Some observers believe that this natural corridor is why the site remained undiscovered for so long. Its very shape limited access, making random exploration inefficient and misleading. The team's focused grid surveys only succeeded because they followed a logical hypothesis that the debris had to be concentrated along the only viable route. And decades before modern sonar confirmed the plateau, one man had already marked this corridor on a map. His notes had been dismissed as the fantasy of an unqualified outsider. Now, the natural features he described were backed by precise measurements and high-definition imaging. This was not a scattered accident of the sea. It was an event confined to a single, narrow passage, preserved by geography and sediment. The topography itself made it nearly impossible for the wheels, horses, and humans to have ended up anywhere else. One corridor, one path, one unavoidable route to destruction. And the man who first mapped that route did it 40 years ago with nothing but conviction and a pair of scuba tanks. The outsider who mapped the corridor. Ron Wyatt was not an archaeologist. He had no formal training in history, excavation, or underwater survey techniques. He was a nurse anesthetist from Tennessee. That is what he was. A medical professional from the American South with no credentials, no institutional backing, and no business being right about any of this. But his life took a different turn when he began independently investigating locations he believed were connected to biblical events. According to reports from those who met him during the 1970s, he approached research with single-minded determination, often pursuing leads dismissed by academics. That determination would later bring him to the Gulf of Aqaba. At the time, most scholars focused on northern marshland theories for army crossings described in biblical accounts. Wyatt rejected these explanations. He argued that a deep water location was required, one capable of instantly overwhelming a large military force. He studied maps, terrain, and tidal patterns and concluded that the beach at Nuweiba offered a plausible entry point. According to his notes, a natural underwater land bridge extended from this shoreline toward the Saudi coast. That feature, he proposed, could funnel an army across a narrow passage, leaving them vulnerable to a catastrophic collapse. In 1978, Wyatt went down himself. No remotely operated vehicles, no high-definition cameras, no military-grade sonar, just basic scuba equipment, poor visibility, and real danger at every depth. Yet he reported observing shapes that resembled wheels, partially covered by coral. He claimed these circular forms were evenly spaced along a straight line, consistent with chariot placement. Some accounts suggest he noted skeletal fragments of horses in positions that appeared connected to the vehicles. He described finding human remains among the wreckage as well. According to Wyatt, the site indicated sudden destruction rather than long-term burial. One of his most controversial claims involved a gold-plated wheel. Wyatt reported that the metal surface was consistent with objects reserved for high-ranking Egyptian officers or royalty. He said the wheel was partially buried and preserved under coral growth. While no physical samples from his dives were ever independently verified, his written records detailed measurements, angles, and placement of objects with notable precision for someone operating entirely outside formal academic channels. Academic institutions were quick to dismiss him. They did not just ignore him, they destroyed him. They labeled him a fraud, a pseudoscience peddler, a religious fanatic seeing what he wanted to see. His lack of formal credentials combined with his other sensational claims unrelated to the Gulf made him an easy target. He also claimed to have found Noah's Ark. He believed Mount Sinai was in Saudi Arabia. He said he had located the Ark of the Covenant beneath Jerusalem. To mainstream science, this was not research. It was delusion dressed up as discovery. He continued anyway, motivated by a conviction that the sites he studied contained physical evidence of events recorded in ancient texts. Ron Wyatt died in 1999, his claims still universally mocked. No institution had ever validated a single finding from the Gulf of Aqaba. His notes sat in private archives. His coordinates gathered dust. The man who had gone down into those waters with nothing but scuba gear and certainty died without ever hearing the words he had spent his life waiting for. He was right. The 2024 expedition returned to the very coordinates Wyatt recorded. Survey grids were drawn directly from his notes. Sonar results and visual confirmations from remotely operated vehicles matched Wyatt's markers with striking precision. Shapes he had described decades earlier reappeared on modern instruments. Circular objects aligned along a straight path, coral encasements, skeletal positions, and mineralized debris corresponded closely to his original observations. The experts who had spent decades dismissing him now faced high-definition evidence that he had been telling the truth, and they had nothing to say. His coordinates led to objects. The objects demanded an explanation for how an entire military force could be eliminated in a single catastrophic moment. Reconstructing the catastrophe. Ancient accounts describe a mass movement of people trapped against water with mountains pressing in from the sides. According to those narratives, a temporary path through the sea opened, allowing movement across what should have been impassable waters. Then at daybreak, the pursuing force was destroyed. That sequence of events aligns uncannily with the evidence uncovered in the Gulf of Aqaba. One historical factor often discussed is the volcanic eruption of Pharaoh, located on what is now Santorini. Around 3,500 years ago, the eruption was enormous, one of the largest in human history. Experts believe it generated massive waves and atmospheric disturbances across the eastern Mediterranean. Reports suggest that the eruption could have produced tsunami drawback effects, a phenomenon in which coastal waters recede dramatically just before the main wave strikes. Some researchers speculate that this could explain a sudden exposure of the underwater plateau. Here is what that would have looked like in practice. The fleeing group reaches Nueva, trapped, mountains behind them, water ahead, no options. Then the sea begins to pull back, not gradually, rapidly. The plateau, normally submerged beneath hundreds of feet of water, becomes passable. To anyone who had never witnessed a tsunami drawback, it would look like the sea itself was opening. They move, they cross, then the army follows. Pursuing chariots entering the wet, unstable seabed would have faced immediate problems. The combination of wheel drag through soft sediment and heavy axle weight could slow movement drastically. Human soldiers attempting to maintain formation would struggle in these conditions. Reports from modern archaeologists suggest that such instability could leave vehicles and animals stuck in place, unable to maneuver, heavy, slowing, sinking into the mud of an exposed seabed while the water they had just watched recede began to gather itself offshore. Then came the returning surge. Water returning with lateral force can overturn heavy objects. Chariots, horses, and soldiers swept into deeper channels in a matter of seconds. The abruptness of the event is consistent with the concentrated debris field, horses aligned with wheels, human remains caught where they fell, not scattered by currents over centuries, dropped in place in a single moment and sealed there. But not every researcher accepts the Thera explanation, and this is where the story ventures into stranger territory. Some theories propose that the pursuit was never really about recapturing escaped laborers. According to certain speculative accounts, the army may have been chasing something far more significant, a powerful artifact, an object of strategic or technological importance that had been removed from Egypt, something the pharaoh could not afford to lose. Under this theory, whatever was being carried by the fleeing group was not merely symbolic, it was functional. And when the army was fully committed to the crossing, it was used. The passage opened, the army entered, the passage closed. There's no physical confirmation of such a mechanism, but consider what the seabed actually shows. The debris is not spread randomly across a wide area the way a storm casualty would be. It follows a precise linear corridor. The alignment is too clean for chaos, too deliberate for accident. That precision is what drives some researchers toward explanations that natural disaster alone cannot fully satisfy. Regardless of the mechanism, the seabed tells a consistent story. One event, sudden, catastrophic. And the question of who controlled the aftermath of that event is where the story becomes truly dark. This is not merely a story of natural disaster or accidental sinking. If the ancient accounts reflect what actually happened here, the implications reach far beyond geology. They reach into history, into faith, and into the question of who controls which version of the past is allowed to survive. That question becomes impossible to ignore once you look at what happened to the evidence after it was found. Silence, removal, and control of the narrative. For over a century, mainstream Egyptology has maintained that no large-scale exodus or catastrophic military loss took place in the Sinai region. Academic frameworks and established chronologies of the New Kingdom make no allowance for the sudden destruction of an army in the manner revealed by modern surveys. And you need to understand what is actually at stake here. Accepting such an event would not just inconvenience a few scholars. It would force institutions to rewrite major portions of established timelines, invalidate decades of published research, and dismantle careers built on a foundation that does not include this event. The implications reach far beyond a single site or artifact. A professor who has spent 30 years teaching that this story is myth cannot simply reverse course. Their publications become fiction. Their students were misled. Their reputation collapses. The institutional pressure to stay silent, to dismiss, to attack the source rather than engage with the evidence is not just understandable. It is overwhelming. But the silence around this discovery goes beyond academic self-preservation, and that is what makes it disturbing. The golden wheel that Ron Wyatt claimed to have recovered illustrates the issue sharply. Reports indicate that he handed it to Egyptian authorities decades ago, believing they would celebrate the find. No museum record exists, no archive documentation is publicly available. There is no registry listing examination results, preservation data, or even confirmation that the artifact was ever cataloged. The single most important piece of physical evidence Wyatt ever produced simply ceased to exist the moment it left his hands. Skeptics say this proves he fabricated the entire story. No wheel, no evidence, no credibility, case closed. But consider the alternative. What if the wheel was real? What if it was confiscated precisely because of what it proved? What if it now sits in a government vault or a private collection? Somewhere it will never be subjected to independent scientific analysis. Artifacts of profound historical significance have disappeared before when they threatened powerful interests. This would not be the first time. And the golden wheel is not the only thing that has vanished. When the 2024 team compared their high-resolution sonar maps to Wyatt's original sketches, they found sections that had previously been dense with debris now entirely empty. Not eroded, not scattered, empty. The team documented elongated drag marks on the seabed, impressions embedded in the sediment that match the size and weight of large coral-encased objects. Geological studies confirm the plateau is extremely stable. Storms cannot explain this. Currents cannot explain this. Natural erosion cannot explain this. According to the experts involved, the pattern is selective. Certain areas are stripped clean while neighboring sections remain untouched. This is not randomness. This looks surgical. This looks like a cleanup operation conducted over decades by someone with the resources, the access, and the motivation to remove an inconvenient truth from the bottom of the sea before the world ever gets a chance to examine it. Missing sections align with high-value targets. Gold-plated wheels, intact cab structures. The objects most likely to provide irrefutable confirmation are precisely the ones that are gone. The question is no longer whether something extraordinary occurred beneath the Red Sea. That question has already been answered by the seabed itself. The question now is one of control. Who decides which events of history are allowed to remain visible? Who decides which evidence quietly disappears? And who gave them that authority? The footage is real, the coordinates are precise, the drag marks are there for anyone with sonar to see. And the silence surrounding all of it is anything but accidental, because what lies beneath the Red Sea may challenge far more than a single archaeological claim. It may challenge who controls history itself. And if something this significant can be managed, suppressed, and partially erased in plain sight, then the most unsettling question is not what else is buried down there. It is who decided we are not allowed to know.